Veteran Raymond Cole and his loyal K9 Max stopped by an abandoned gas station along the Arizona highway, the desert heat blazing above 140 degrees. They split their last burger in half for him, half for Max. It was supposed to be just a quiet lunch in the middle of nowhere. But then, an old woman emerged through the wavering heat, wearing a torn military jacket. She didn't ask for food. She only looked at the burger, as if remembering what kindness used to taste like. "I used to cook for soldiers," she whispered, voice trembling, "before the fire took everything." That moment changed everything. She was a retired military nurse. 3 years ago, her home had burned to ash. They called it an accident. But what lay behind that fire was something darker, a buried secret. The crime of a powerful corporation, a town's silence, and the traces of ashes still breathing beneath the sand. Together, they would face the fire once more and prove that mercy can survive even in the harshest place on earth. What they discovered beneath the desert sun will break your heart and make you believe in miracles again. Before we begin, please subscribe and leave a like. Your support truly means the world to us, and tell us where you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far kindness can travel. The heat rippled across the highway like liquid glass. The air itself seemed alive, humming with a dry, electric tension. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly, yellow sand, cracked asphalt, and the ghostly shimmer of distant sagebrush. Above it all, the sky blazed white-blue, so bright it made the world tremble. Raymond Cole drove his old pickup through the emptiness, one arm resting on the open window, the other steady on the wheel. 55, sun-worn and quiet, he looked like a man built out of dust and duty. His eyes, pale gray and still, stared ahead without hurry. There was no one out here but him, his thoughts, and the desert. Beside him sat Max, a sable-coated German shepherd whose thick fur gleamed like smoke under sunlight. 9 years old, disciplined, loyal, and always alert. The dog's ears twitched at every gust of wind, but his presence was calm, a soldier's composure in a dog's frame. Raymond glanced at him once, the faintest smile tugging his lips. They had been on patrol for hours, checking remote posts no one else wanted. It was the kind of work that came without recognition, but Raymond didn't need any. Out here, he found something close to peace: silence, space, and the honesty of heat. By noon, he pulled off the road near a half-collapsed gas station, its sign tilting into the wind, its pumps long dead. He killed the engine, grabbed a burger from the cooler and split it in half. One half for himself, the other for Max. The dog waited until Raymond nodded, then began to eat with quiet focus. That's when he saw movement. At first, it looked like a trick of the heat, a shimmer on the horizon. But then the shimmer took shape. A person walking straight toward the truck. Raymond squinted. The figure was small, wrapped in a heavy military jacket that made no sense under this sun. As she drew closer, the details came into view. An elderly woman, tall but slightly stooped, with silver-gray hair stuck to her neck, lips cracked and dry. Her steps were steady, deliberate. She reached the edge of the truck's shadow and stopped, resting one trembling hand on the hood. The smell of heat and dust surrounded her. She didn't ask for water, didn't speak, only stared at the burger in Raymond's hand, as though it was a memory more than a meal. Raymond didn't hesitate. He handed her his half. Her fingers shook as she took it, but her eyes stayed proud. She lifted the burger slowly, almost reverently, and whispered, her voice low and raw, I used to feed the soldiers too, before the fire. Something in the way she said before the fire made Raymond stop breathing for a moment. The wind carried fine dust between them. Max stood now, alert, his gaze flicking from her to the horizon. She ate quietly, each bite small and careful. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve, then straightened with effort. "Evelyn Hart," she said. "Nurse. Marines." The way she said it, simple, proud, made it sound like a vow. Up close, she looked to be in her late 70s. Her jacket was faded green, lined with old patches and sun-bleached ribbons. Around her neck hung a broken dog tag on a string. Raymond nodded once, respecting the introduction, then offered her his canteen. She took it, drank a slow sip, and sighed as though remembering what water felt like. She told him about a cabin she once owned outside a town called Ridgepoint, how it burned 3 summers ago, taking her husband and everything she had. "They said it was bad wiring," she muttered. "An accident. But I know better." She squinted toward the empty horizon. A company called Grey Rock bought the land a month later, built their plant right on top of it. Raymond said nothing. He'd heard stories like that before. People swallowed by the machinery of profit and silence. But something about her tone, the quiet certainty, rooted itself in him. Max sat down beside her, pressing his shoulder lightly against her leg. Evelyn smiled faintly and reached down to scratch the dog's head. "Good soldier," she murmured. The sun had shifted by then, throwing long, trembling shadows across the sand. The heat pressed down harder. Evelyn looked toward the horizon again, her face unreadable. "Sometimes," she said, "the land remembers what people forget." Raymond studied her for a moment. "Where are you headed?" "Back there," she said simply. "What's left of it?" There was a silence heavy with things unsaid, the kind that comes when 2 strangers recognize the same kind of loss in each other. Then Evelyn adjusted the strap of her satchel and turned to leave. Raymond watched as she stepped into the sun again, her outline flickering in the glare. For a moment, it felt like she might vanish entirely, swallowed by the heat. Then Max growled. It was a low, restrained sound, but sharp enough to pull Raymond's attention. The dog's body tensed, eyes locked on something far beyond the ridge. Raymond followed his gaze and saw it. A black SUV moved slowly along the distant rise, the light catching on its tinted windows. It was too clean, too new, too purposeful to belong out here. It lingered for a moment, paused, then glided out of sight. Evelyn stopped too, sensing it. She didn't turn around, just stood still for a beat longer than necessary. The desert went quiet again, the kind of silence that carries a warning. When she finally walked on, her shadow stretched thin and wavering behind her. Raymond stayed where he was, hand resting on Max's head. The dog's heartbeat was steady under his palm, but the eyes, those eyes, still tracked the ridge as if the danger hadn't left. "Easy, boy," Raymond said softly. But he didn't believe it himself. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint scent of something scorched, so faint it might have been imagined. Yet it made his chest tighten, the way old instincts do. He looked once more toward the ridge, now empty under the ruthless sun. And though he couldn't explain why, Raymond Cole knew this wasn't the last time he'd see that black SUV or the woman who walked toward it. The desert held its breath, shimmering, waiting. By dusk, the desert bled into rust and violet. The heat that had burned the world all day now retreated, leaving behind a thin shimmer that blurred the horizon like breath on glass. The truck's headlights carved narrow tunnels of light through the oncoming dark, scattering moths and dust into golden sparks. The air smelled of copper and exhaustion. Raymond kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the window where the wind slipped through and touched his sleeve with dry fingers. Beside him, Max sat upright, alert, eyes glowing faintly amber in the dim light of the dashboard. They had followed Evelyn's directions carved in the dust of the truck hood, a series of trembling lines drawn by an old hand. It wasn't a map, not really. It was something closer to faith. He adjusted the rearview mirror once, catching a faint glimmer behind them. The horizon where he had left the old woman standing. She had looked small beneath the sun, almost spectral, yet her words still clung to the air between them, before the fire. He didn't know why he believed her, only that he did. The road narrowed, winding through stone ridges the color of dried blood, and then opened into silence. He turned off the main path. Tires crunched over gravel, grinding the desert's brittle skin. The last light stretched long and copper-red across the sand, making the ground look wounded. When the truck finally rolled to a stop, the engine ticked quietly, cooling in the wind. Before him lay a flat expanse of ground. No walls, no roof, only memory. The remnants of Evelyn's cabin were half buried beneath years of sand and neglect. Charred beams jutted from the ground like broken ribs, and the air above them shimmered faintly, still tasting faintly of smoke. Raymond stepped out. The first breath he took felt heavier than it should have. Time had buried the fire, but not erased it. The ground crackled beneath his boots, thin crusts of ash breaking apart like fragile glass. The air was so still he could hear Max's paws pressing into the dust. Soft, rhythmic, patient. The dog's tail hung low, his nose tracing invisible trails that memory had left behind. The silence was a strange kind, not peaceful, but waiting. Raymond moved slowly, eyes sweeping across the scorched patch. A faint metallic glint caught the dying sunlight near a cactus stump. He crouched down, brushed aside the sand, and unearthed a small object. A locket, its metal warped and blackened by heat. The hinge was fused on one side, but with a careful twist of his thumb, it yielded. A whisper of soot escaped. Inside, beneath a film of cracked glass, was a faded photograph. A young man in a Marine uniform, his arm around Evelyn, her smile bright and tender. The corner of the photo had curled inward, burned, but the faces had survived. Raymond held it close for a long moment. He imagined her younger, the proud nurse she once was, laughing as she hung fresh linens outside a cabin that no longer stood, her husband's voice calling from the doorway. The thought stung. Love had once lived here, strong enough to survive the fire's appetite. He turned the locket over in his palm. The initials etched on the back had melted halfway into the metal. M.H. He didn't know who that was yet, but he could feel the story breathing behind the letters. He closed the locket and slipped it into his pocket, its weight settling against his chest like a heartbeat that wasn't his. The wind shifted. Max, a few yards ahead, suddenly stiffened. His ears snapped forward. Then he began to dig, quick, fierce, deliberate. Sand flew behind him in small bursts until his claws scraped something solid. Raymond hurried to his side, brushing away the remaining dirt. Beneath it, he found a dog tag, half melted, edges curled inward like petals of ruin. He lifted it gently, turned it toward the fading light. The engraving shimmered faintly through the grime. To Evelyn, for courage always. M.H. Raymond exhaled, slow and steady. He read the line twice, then once more in silence. Whoever MH, he had loved Evelyn enough to leave behind metal proof. The tag was a relic, but the emotion it carried was alive, something that refused to die with the fire. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, beside the locket, and rested his hand there for a moment. Max sat close, panting softly, his gaze shifting between Raymond's face and the darkening horizon. The world around them dimmed into twilight. Long shadows stretched across the sand, blurring the boundary between earth and sky. The light thinned until it felt like the desert was exhaling its last breath of day. Raymond scanned the area again, moving slower now, and noticed faint impressions breaking the surface. Tire tracks. He knelt, tracing one of the grooves with his gloved hand. The tread was deep, clean, and fresh, not weathered by wind or time. He pressed his palm against it. The sand beneath was still warm. Someone had been here, recently. He followed the marks a few feet farther before they vanished into open terrain, where the wind had swept the trail clean. The pattern wasn't like civilian tires, industrial grade, off-road, something built to carry weight or secrets. He stood again, eyes narrowing against the falling light. The wind had died completely now, leaving the air unnaturally still. The quiet was so dense that even the rustle of his jacket sounded too loud. Somewhere behind him, metal creaked faintly, the sound of something shifting that shouldn't be moving. He turned sharply. Nothing. Only the desert. But the sound lingered, faint and deliberate, like a whisper from something alive beneath the sand. Max growled, low, controlled, almost a vibration rather than a sound. His tail stiffened, nose pointed toward the ridge to the west. Raymond followed his line of sight. The horizon flickered, once, twice. Then two small points of light appeared, headlights, distant but deliberate. They blinked once and vanished behind the ridge. Raymond stood there, frozen between instinct and disbelief. The air hummed faintly, and then came the thunder. A deep, rolling sound that didn't belong to the sky, because the sky above him was clear, bruised purple but cloudless. The sound passed over them, low and heavy, rattling the sand at their feet before fading into nothing. He stayed like that for a long time, unmoving, listening. The wind refused to return. Even the insects had gone silent. Max shifted closer, brushing his shoulder against Raymond's leg, as if to remind him that silence doesn't mean safety. The locket pressed against his chest, the dog tag against his palm, two pieces of memory pulsing like living things. Far in the distance, something glimmered again, a faint reflection, maybe glass, maybe eyes. It vanished before he could be sure. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but it no longer looked empty. It looked watchful. He drew a slow breath and looked down at Max. The dog's ears were still raised, gaze fixed on the ridge. For a second, Raymond thought he saw movement there, a ripple of shadow that didn't belong to the wind. Then it was gone. A coyote called somewhere beyond the rocks, one short, broken howl that died before it reached the stars. Raymond didn't move. The ashes beneath his boots were no longer cold. They were waiting. Morning came without ceremony, just a pale wash of light stretching across the desert and seeping through the cracked blinds of Raymond's outpost. The air still smelled faintly of dust and oil, the kind of scent that never left these walls. The fan above his head clicked with every slow rotation, pushing the stale air in circles. Raymond sat at his old wooden desk, the one marked with coffee rings and sun-bleached papers, sipping from a tin mug that had lost its shine years ago. Max rested by the door, one ear twitching each time a coyote barked far off in the dunes. On the laptop screen, a file glowed faintly: Ridgepoint Fire, accidental ignition due to faulty wiring. The title itself felt dishonest. Raymond scrolled through the neatly typed paragraphs: the incident report, the photographic evidence, the signature at the bottom, filed by Deputy Alan Keene. The name tugged at something familiar in his memory. A fellow officer from another lifetime, one who had retired early and resurfaced in a different uniform entirely. The new file beneath his name read, Environmental Consultant, Grey Rock Industries. Raymond's jaw tightened. The phrasing of the report was too smooth, too deliberate. Every line scrubbed clean of irregularities, each timestamp perfectly aligned. He had written enough reports in his day to know when someone was trying to erase a truth by burying it under procedure. He tapped the key to zoom in on a scanned photo, the same stretch of land where Evelyn's cabin once stood. Even in monochrome, he could tell the burn pattern didn't match an electrical fire. It fanned outward, not inward. Gasoline, not wiring. He leaned back in his chair. The desert wind rattled the window pane, and the papers on his desk trembled like restless ghosts. Raymond printed the file and slipped the pages into a manila folder, labeling it pending. It was the same word he had written on dozens of unsolved cases over the years, small truths the system had chosen to forget. From the edge of the desk, he picked up the half-melted dog tag and slid it into the folder's pocket. A silent promise, pressed between bureaucracy and memory. By noon, the sun burned high and white, bleaching the world of its color. Raymond parked outside Grey Rock Industries, the largest blot of metal and concrete for 50 miles. The plant's perimeter fence hummed faintly with current. Beyond it, storage silos and steel piping shimmered in the heat, giving the illusion of movement where there was none. He flashed his credentials at the guard booth: a routine inspection, environmental compliance. Nothing unusual, at least on paper. The young guard waved him through with the detached politeness of someone who didn't ask questions. Inside the main yard, the soundscape changed. The mechanical thrum of machinery, the hiss of compressed air, the distant clang of metal on metal. Raymond walked with measured calm, clipboard in hand, Max pacing quietly beside him. The dog's head turned from side to side, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning. To anyone watching, they were just another inspection team checking boxes. But Raymond's gaze kept drifting to the corners, the places where dust gathered, where silence was thicker than it should be. The plant manager appeared before long, Gordon Gray, mid-50s, tall, square-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair slicked neatly back. He wore a pale blue shirt rolled at the elbows and the kind of smile that belonged to men who owned their airspace. His handshake was firm, practiced, a salesman's handshake, not a worker's. "Mr. Cole, isn't it? Glad you made it through this heat." Raymond returned the gesture with polite indifference. "Heat doesn't bother me. Paperwork does." Gray laughed, an easy, empty sound. "You'll find we keep our records meticulous here. Grey Rock doesn't like surprises." They walked together along the perimeter. Raymond asked questions about chemical storage, waste disposal, safety procedures, the sort of routine queries designed to sound tedious. Gray answered all of them with polished confidence, but his tone carried the faint rhythm of someone performing a script. The deeper they moved into the site, the heavier the air grew. Beneath the antiseptic smell of cleaning agents lingered something older, faint, oily, almost burnt. Near the rear storage unit, Max froze. His tail went stiff, body lowering slightly, ears locked forward. A deep, restrained growl rumbled through his chest, low enough to sound like a warning rather than a threat. Raymond felt the vibration through the leash. He knelt briefly, hand resting on Max's shoulder, eyes narrowing toward the metal door at the end of the lot. The door was sealed with a heavy padlock. The faint scent of gasoline clung to it, diluted but undeniable. It wasn't fresh, but recent enough that the desert's dry air hadn't erased it. Raymond leaned closer, his hand brushing the cool metal. For a moment, he imagined fire blooming behind it, the echo of a past that refused to die quietly. Behind him, Gray's voice broke the silence. "That area's restricted, officer. Company prototypes. No entry without clearance." Raymond turned, his expression unreadable. "Didn't plan on leaving yet," he said evenly. Gray's smile didn't falter, but his eyes tightened just enough to reveal irritation beneath the charm. "Some boundaries exist for a reason. Let's finish your report elsewhere." Raymond nodded once and followed him back through the maze of machinery. Max kept glancing over his shoulder, every muscle tense, the fur along his spine slightly raised. Inside the main office, air conditioning replaced heat with sterility. Framed photos of the plant's construction lined the walls, all featuring Gray shaking hands with politicians and engineers. Raymond noted the smallest detail, the same face appearing in every picture, always in the background, wearing a deputy's badge in one and a corporate ID in another. Alan Keene, the ghost inside the file. Gray handed him a clipboard with pre-filled answers. "Our last inspection report. You'll find everything up to code." Raymond scanned the pages briefly, then tucked them under his arm. "You're nothing if not consistent, Mr. Gray." "Consistency," Gray replied, smiling thinly, "is how we survive." Outside, the heat hit again like an open oven. Raymond walked back to the truck in silence, Max padding beside him. When he reached the driver's seat, he opened the folder and slid the inspection papers inside. Beneath them, the dog tag gleamed faintly, its engraving catching the sun. He stared at it for a long time, his reflection warped on the curved metal. The ride back toward the outpost was long and silent. The road stretched endless between dunes, a ribbon of cracked asphalt vanishing into violet haze. Max lay quietly in the passenger seat, but his ears twitched now and then, following a sound Raymond couldn't hear. He reached forward and rubbed the dog's neck absently, more for comfort than reassurance. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, twilight bled into night. Raymond glanced in the rearview mirror, a habit born of too many years in uniform. For a while there was nothing but starlight and the faint shimmer of desert heat. Then, Max lifted his head, whining softly, his eyes fixed on the reflection behind them. Raymond followed his gaze. Far down the road, barely visible, a dark shape moved. A vehicle without headlights, gliding at a measured pace. The same kind of SUV he'd seen on the ridge the day before. It kept its distance, never closing in, never falling back. He tightened his grip on the wheel, his eyes steady on the horizon. The stars above the desert burned quietly, cold, endless, and watching. And behind him, in the dark, something followed. The morning came sharp and colorless, the kind that peeled the desert bare of illusion. Raymond's truck hummed low along the cracked highway, its tires whispering over gravel. The sun was climbing, pale and indifferent, casting long bones of shadow across the sand. Beside him, Max stared out the window, ears twitching at every ripple of wind, the faint reflection of the man behind him mirrored in his dark eyes. Raymond hadn't slept. The ghost of the SUV still lingered in the corners of his mind, a silent reminder that the truth had begun to move faster than he could. He reached Independence Ridge just after dawn. The bus shelter sat lonely on the edge of nowhere, a cracked bench under a warped tin roof that groaned each time the wind exhaled. Evelyn was there, wrapped in a worn wool blanket that swallowed her frail frame. Her silver hair clung to her temples, her eyes hollow yet clear, watching the horizon like someone waiting for an answer the desert never gave. On her knees rested a small tin box, edges rusted, its lid dented from years of carrying more than it should. Raymond stopped the engine, stepped out quietly, and approached her without a word. The air between them smelled faintly of rain that never came. Evelyn looked up, her lips trembling in what might have been a smile. "You found the fire," she said softly, not as a question but as a memory surfacing. Raymond didn't reply. His eyes dropped to the box. She lifted the lid with trembling hands. Inside lay the fragile remnants of a life, a bronze service medal, its ribbon faded to the color of sand, a folded letter yellowed at the edges, and a photograph of Evelyn and her husband standing beside a young man with the unmistakable grin of ambition. Gordon Gray, decades younger. His hair darker, his eyes sharper, the kind of gaze that learned how to own things before it learned to lose them. "He was our neighbor once," Evelyn whispered. Her voice cracked slightly, more from restraint than weakness. "Used to bring us coffee when my husband was deployed. He was kind, before he learned how to buy silence." A gust of wind slipped through the shelter, lifting a corner of the letter. Raymond caught it gently and placed it back in the box. Max moved closer, pressing his muzzle against Evelyn's leg. The gesture made her smile faintly, that kind of small, unguarded smile that breaks the crust of grief for a moment. She reached down and scratched the dog's neck. "You still listen better than most men," she said quietly. Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the highway. "There's a boy," she murmured. "Comes by sometimes with food, leftover pies from the diner. He sells newspapers by the old gas station down by Maroon Road. Told me he heard things. Men in Gray's uniform talking about barrels buried near the lake trail." She looked back at Raymond, eyes steady now. "His name's Luke." By evening, the desert heat had softened to a dusty orange. Raymond found the boy exactly where Evelyn had said, standing outside a diner with a stack of papers under one arm, calling out headlines no one cared to hear. Luke couldn't have been older than 14. His frame was wiry, the kind of thinness that comes from hunger more than youth. He wore a denim jacket too big for him, the sleeves rolled and his jeans patched at the knees. His hair was dark and unruly, his eyes sharp and restless, like he'd learned to measure danger faster than words could form. Raymond approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "You, Luke." The boy hesitated, clutching the papers tighter. "Depends who's asking. Someone who heard you might know about Maroon Lake." That earned him a glance, cautious, calculating. Luke scanned the street, then lowered his voice. "You're not one of them? Wouldn't be here if I was." The boy's stare lingered on Max, who sat obediently by Raymond's side, chest rising slow, eyes calm but watchful. Something in the animal's stillness seemed to convince him. Luke jerked his head toward the back of the diner. "Come on. Not here." They crossed the service road, walking half a mile into the scrubland, until the sound of cars faded into wind. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky with bruised gold. Luke stopped beside a patch of dry mesquite, glancing back once before kneeling. "Here," he said simply. "Heard them talking about digging at this spot 2 nights ago. Said something about leaking drums. Thought it was trash." Max began sniffing the ground, circling once, twice, then digging with sudden urgency. His paws threw up dirt in rapid bursts until the dull clang of metal echoed through the silence. Raymond crouched, brushing away loose soil. A rusted drum emerged, its surface blistered, seams corroded. The stench of fuel and decay seeped out from the cracks. He covered his mouth with his sleeve. Raymond took out his phone, snapping photos from multiple angles, marking the coordinates with practiced precision. "You didn't see this," he said quietly to the boy, his voice firm but kind. Luke nodded, though his eyes lingered on the drum, wide, uncertain, understanding more than he should. Raymond placed a steady hand on his shoulder, the kind of touch that carries both warning and protection. They turned back toward the road, the silence between them heavy but unspoken. The first stars had begun to appear, thin and trembling above the horizon. Raymond thought he could already hear the hum of his truck engine in the distance when a sound split the air. Sharp, metallic, unmistakable. A rifle bolt, drawn and ready. He froze. Max's ears pricked instantly, body coiled low, a growl rising from his chest. Dust drifted across the trail as 2 figures stepped out from the mesquite brush. Both wore dark scarves over their faces, sun-bleached jackets that hid everything but the intent in their movements. One carried a scoped rifle. The other, a short-barreled shotgun resting loose but ready. Raymond shifted slightly, just enough to position Luke behind him. His voice was calm, steady, almost too soft for the danger in front of him. "Easy," he murmured, to Max, not the men. The dog's muscles rippled under his hand, waiting for the signal that might never come. The taller of the 2 men tilted his head. "Walk away, Cole." His voice was muffled through the scarf, but the familiarity in his tone cut like glass. Raymond didn't answer. He didn't need to. The name alone told him enough. Whoever these men were, they already knew him. A thin breath of wind passed over the sand, and the desert seemed to tighten around them. For the first time in years, Raymond felt that strange, electric stillness, the moment before a storm breaks, when even the air forgets how to move. Max's growl deepened. Luke's breath hitched. Somewhere between them, the world waited to see who would make the first mistake. And in that silence, the desert held its breath. Chapter 5. The fire returns. The first shot never came. Instead, it was the sound of Max's body cutting through the air, a flash of muscle and instinct. He lunged, colliding with the nearest gunman, teeth sinking into cloth and forearm, dragging him off balance before the rifle ever steadied. The second man jerked his weapon up, but Raymond had already rolled behind a ridge of sandstone, the desert flaring white with sunlight. His sidearm barked twice, sharp and measured. Warning shots only, deliberate as a heartbeat. The echoes bounced off the canyon walls, scattered by the wind. Dust rose like smoke. The gunman faltered. One shouted, retreating toward a black pickup hidden beyond the brush. The other stumbled after him, clutching his arm, leaving a trail of red against the sand. Tires spun, spraying grit and gravel, then disappeared into the glare of the highway. Silence returned in uneven breaths, the kind that never feels finished. Raymond lowered his gun slowly, scanning the ridge. Easy. he murmured, voice steady though his pulse thundered in his throat. Max trotted back, panting, his fur streaked with dirt, eyes burning with that same wild focus that had saved them both more than once. Raymond knelt and placed a hand on his neck, feeling the tremor of adrenaline beneath muscle. "Good boy," he whispered. And for a moment, the desert felt alive again. Not empty, but waiting. They didn't linger. The coordinates, the drum, the proof, all of it would have to wait until daylight and a call no one could intercept. For now, there was only the long drive back through the silence. The sun slipped behind the horizon, leaving the sky bruised and molten. Raymond drove without music, without words, his eyes fixed on the thin line of road that looked more like memory than direction. By the time he reached Independence Ridge, it was night. The stars were hidden behind a red glow that did not belong to the sky. Smoke billowed up, thick and black, rising from the direction of the bus shelter. Raymond's heart dropped even before the first flame came into view. The small structure was engulfed, a funeral pyre against the wind. Max leapt from the truck before it stopped moving, barking into the heat. Raymond ran. The air was a wall of fire and noise, each breath burning as it entered. The roof sagged inward, steel groaning under the weight of flame. Through the smoke, a shape moved, small, slumped, clutching something close. Evelyn. She was on her knees near the back wall, wrapped not in her blanket now, but in smoke and ash, coughing violently. The tin box was still in her arms, pressed against her chest, as though it could protect what little remained. "They came back," she rasped, her voice breaking. "Said the past should stay buried." Her eyes were glassy, but her grip on the box never loosened. Raymond didn't answer. He dropped his jacket over her shoulders and lifted her, one arm under her knees, the other steadying the precious metal box. Max circled them, barking against the fire as embers fell like red rain. Behind them, the roof caved, sending a column of sparks roaring into the night. The flames reflected in Max's eyes, twin mirrors of a promise that refused to die. They reached the truck just as the last beam fell. Raymond laid Evelyn gently on the ground, her breathing shallow but still there, fragile, steady. Her lips moved faintly, a whisper lost beneath the siren wail of the wind. He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, still beating. He exhaled a sound that was half relief, half prayer. Then headlights pierced the smoke. 2 beams slicing through red haze, growing brighter, closer. The hum of an engine followed, low, deliberate, too controlled for a stranger. Raymond turned, shielding his eyes. A black SUV rolled to a stop a few yards away, the same silhouette that had haunted his mirrors for nights. The driver's door opened. Gordon Gray stepped out. He looked different now, the Polish gone, replaced by something raw and unmasked. Sweat streaked his face, reflecting the flames behind him. His expensive shirt clung to his chest, half untucked, one sleeve torn. But his posture was still the same, the confident tilt of a man who thought control was permanent. In his right hand, a pistol gleamed dully under the firelight. "You should have walked away, Cole," he shouted over the roar, his voice shredded by anger and smoke. "You don't understand what's at stake." Raymond stood between him and Evelyn, calm even in the chaos. "I understand enough." Gray raised the gun, his hand trembling only slightly. "Then you understand this is where it ends." But Max was already moving. The K9 launched forward, a blur of motion against flame. He struck Gray full in the chest, knocking the weapon aside. The gun went off once, harmlessly, the bullet slicing through night air and disappearing into sand. Both figures tumbled hard, Max's weight driving Gray backward until the man hit the dirt with a sound that emptied the world. The pistol clattered out of reach. Raymond crossed the distance in 3 strides, his training taking over where thought ended. He kicked the gun away, yanked Gray's arm behind his back, and snapped the cuffs shut with one decisive click. The man struggled, cursed, then fell still when Raymond's knee pressed against his spine. In the distance, the faint wail of sirens grew, climbing the ridge, carried on the wind. Someone had seen the fire. Someone had called. The night, once wide and silent, was suddenly full of witnesses. Raymond turned toward Evelyn. She was conscious, barely, eyes reflecting the red sky. Max returned to her side, muzzle brushing her hand, as though asking permission to rest. The woman's lips moved again, softer this time. "The box," she whispered. "It's all that's left." He nodded, retrieving it from where it had fallen in the sand. The lid was scorched but still intact. When he opened it, the metal and the photo remained, edges singed but whole. But beneath them, tucked into the lining, was something new. An envelope he hadn't seen before, sealed and untouched by the fire. He tore it open carefully. Inside was a single document, official, stamped, and signed in ink that had not yet faded. Land transfer agreement. Evelyn's property, reassigned to Grey Rock Industries, dated 15 years back. The signature below was not hers. It was her husband's name, forged. Raymond stared at it for a long moment, the paper trembling faintly in his gloved hands. Around him, the fire hissed, the wind shifted, and the truth stood naked at last. He folded the document, sliding it back into the box, his jaw tightening. The evidence Evelyn had guarded for years had survived, not by chance, but by faith. As the first police lights broke over the ridge, he looked down at Max, who sat silently beside him, chest rising slow and steady. "We're done running," Raymond said quietly. The dog's ears twitched once, the only answer needed, and above them, beneath the burning sky, the desert exhaled. The past was no longer buried. It was burning its way home. Morning came slow that day, not with the sharp light of summer, but with the tender warmth of a world learning how to heal. The desert, once burned and brittle, had softened under the touch of spring. Wild sage sprouted through the cracks of blackened soil, and the wind carried the scent of cedar and earth instead of smoke. Near Maroon Ridge, the sound of hammers and laughter rose where silence used to live. 3 months had passed since the fire, and the land remembered mercy. Volunteers from nearby towns, ranchers, retirees, students with paint on their jeans, gathered in a circle of rebuilding. They worked where the ashes of Evelyn's cabin once lay, laying down new beams over charred foundations. A small banner fluttered above the entrance. "Rebuild Day. Hope in our hands." The morning sun climbed slowly, glinting off tools, faces, and the faint shimmer of second chances. Evelyn stood among them, no longer wrapped in blankets, but in a simple cream shawl that caught the light like woven gold. Her silver hair was pinned back, her eyes alive again, lined not by despair, but by the kind of peace that only comes after the storm. She smiled as she handed nails to a young woman balancing on the new porch rail, steadying the plank. The movement was small, but it carried grace, the kind that reminded those watching that survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about choosing to live again. From the porch steps, Raymond watched quietly. His arms were crossed, his posture still that of a soldier, alert, anchored, but the edge in his gaze had softened. Beside him, Max rested in the shade, paws stretched forward, the desert breeze teasing through his sable and black coat. The K9 wore his old service medal on a worn leather strap around his neck, scratched, tarnished, but gleaming with pride. Each glint of sunlight on that medal told a story no words ever could. Nearby, Luke was painting the sign that would hang above the new doorway. The boy had grown a little taller, his shoulders less hunched, his laughter freer. A smear of green paint streaked across his cheek as he brushed broad strokes over the fresh cedar board. When he finished, he stepped back, squinting against the light. The words read, "Home again. 1946 and 2025. He grinned shyly and looked toward Evelyn. "How's that?" She smiled, voice steady but thick with emotion. "Perfect. That's exactly what it is." Raymond allowed himself a rare smile. He reached down and brushed the top of Max's head. "Looks like you're out of a job, partner," he said quietly. Max's tail thumped once, slow and content. The desert around them seemed to hum in agreement. By noon, the last wall went up. The new cabin stood proud but humble, a home reborn from the bones of its past. When the volunteers finally stepped back, their faces glistened with sweat and sawdust, but their eyes carried that same quiet satisfaction shared among those who build not for pay, but for meaning. Someone brought out lemonade, someone else played an old tune on a harmonica, and the air turned gentle again, like laughter carried by wind. The trial had ended weeks before. Grey Rock Industries, once a name that towered over the town's economy, now existed only in court records and whispers. Gordon Gray's conviction had made headlines, but it was the story of Evelyn Hart, the woman who refused to forget, that people remembered most. She had testified with trembling hands but unwavering voice, the tin box resting before her like a relic of conscience. When the forged deeds were revealed, the courtroom had gone silent, not with shock, but with shame. Justice had arrived not in thunder, but in truth. Raymond never spoke much about it. He had sat quietly in the back that day, Max curled at his feet, his gaze distant yet calm. For him, justice wasn't the verdict. It was this: the sound of nails driven into wood, a woman's laughter returning to a place where fire once took everything, and a boy painting a sign with hope instead of fear. As the sun dipped westward, the crowd began to fade, leaving only the three of them, Evelyn, Raymond, and Max, bathed in the slow amber of evening. The desert stretched wide and kind around them, its heat no longer cruel but human. Evelyn approached the porch, her steps measured but sure, and placed a gentle hand on Raymond's shoulder. "You gave me back more than a home," she said softly. He turned, meeting her eyes that had once held loss, but now carried peace. "You just reminded me what mercy looks like," he answered. She smiled, a full, quiet smile that seemed to forgive everything the world had ever taken. Max lifted his head, watching them both, ears twitching as though he understood every word. The old medal at his chest caught one last flash of light, a brief flare like the heartbeat of the sun. As dusk settled, the desert exhaled its final breath of heat. The sky turned molten gold, then crimson, then the pale silver of forgiveness. The cabin's windows glowed softly from the lanterns within, and for the first time in years, the wind passing through Maroon Ridge carried not the scent of smoke, but of cedar, paint, and renewal. Raymond sat beside Max on the porch steps. Evelyn settled near them, her hands folded over her lap. For a long time, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was sacred, the kind that hums beneath the heart when life, at last, decides to be kind. Far beyond, the horizon shimmered with a faint mirage, a wavering dance of heat over sand. It looked almost like fire, but gentler, warmer, not destruction, but memory. The heat that remembered mercy, and there, beneath that golden light, a veteran, a woman, and a dog sat together. 3 survivors bound not by war or loss, but by the quiet grace that remains when everything else burns away. Some stories don't end when the fire goes out. They linger, in the scent of cedar, in a quiet morning breeze, in the soft weight of a loyal heart resting at our feet. What we remember isn't the noise or the fear. It's the mercy that chose to stay when everything else was lost. Out here, heroes rarely wear uniforms anymore. They build, they listen, they forgive. They hold the line between what was broken and what still deserves a chance. And sometimes, that line is nothing more than a dog's steady gaze, or a hand reaching out in silence. The world keeps moving, fast, loud, unforgiving. But every so often, somewhere between dusk and dawn, kindness stands its ground. And those who've seen too much of the dark learn to guard the light in small, quiet ways. Because courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about staying. And mercy, real mercy, is what remembers us long after the heat fades. If stories like this still warm your heart on quiet nights, stay with us. Subscribe, and let the next story find you when you need it most.